At my husband's funeral, a message flashed on my phone. "I'm alive. Trust no one." That was the sentence I couldn't stop hearing in my mind, even while everyone around me was dressed in black, speaking in softened voices, pretending grief had a shape that made sense. The church in Nashville felt too warm for a day like this, as if the air itself refused to accept what we were all supposed to believe. I remember sitting in the front pew, my hands folded tightly around a folded tissue that I never actually used, because I wasn't crying the way I thought I would. People kept coming up to me saying, "He was a good man," and "You're strong, Evelyn," but none of it reached me. Not really. Because my phone kept vibrating in my lap like something alive, something urgent, something wrong. I waited until the pastor turned his back before I looked down again, and there it was, the same message burning into the screen. "I'm alive. The coffin is empty." My breath caught so sharply I thought someone might notice. I leaned slightly toward the woman sitting next to me, my sister-in-law Diane, and whispered, "Did you see this number?" She frowned. "What number?" she asked. I turned the phone slightly, but the message had already disappeared from the lock screen like it never existed. My heart started to beat harder. Not faster, just heavier, like it was sinking into something I couldn't name. Around me, the service continued. My son Michael stood near the front, his shoulders rigid, his face unreadable. Beside him, Laura, his wife, kept touching his arm gently, guiding him through each moment like she was the one holding him together. When I looked at them, I didn't see grief anymore. I saw distance, control, something rehearsed. "He wouldn't have wanted us to break down," Laura whispered to a guest, almost smiling. I didn't understand how anyone could smile on a day like this. My fingers tightened around my phone again, and this time a second message appeared before I could even blink. "Don't trust your children." The words didn't feel like a warning. They felt like a command that had already decided my life for me. I excused myself from the pew, walking slowly down the aisle, my heels clicking softly against the stone floor, until I reached the vestibule where the noise of the service faded into a dull hum. I looked at the screen again. Nothing. No messages. No sender. Just silence. "This isn't possible," I whispered to myself, but even as I said it, I realized I wasn't asking whether it was possible. I was asking whether I had missed something all along. Whether the last few days, the last few weeks, the last few years had been building towards something I never saw. A hand touched my shoulder. I turned quickly. It was Michael. "Mom," he said gently. "Are you okay? You've been gone a while." I studied his face. He looked tired, too controlled. "Did you take my phone?" I asked quietly. He blinked. "What? No. Why would I take your phone?" Behind him, Laura appeared in the doorway. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice smooth, careful. I hesitated. The words on the screen felt ridiculous when spoken out loud, like they belonged to another world. I finally shook my head. "It's nothing," I said. But it wasn't nothing. I knew it wasn't nothing. Back inside, the service was reaching its final prayer. The coffin was closed. Heavy. Final. Or at least, it was supposed to be. I remember staring at it for a long time, longer than anyone else seemed comfortable with, because something about it didn't sit right with me. The timing, the rushed arrangements, the way I was told there would be no viewing. "It's better this way," Michael had said earlier that morning. "You don't need to see him like that." Like that. As if grief had rules. As if love had limits. As the service ended, people began to stand, chairs scraping softly against the floor. Someone touched my arm, offering condolences, but I barely heard them. My phone stayed silent now, almost mockingly so, as if it had never spoken at all. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not by the people in the room, by something beyond it. When we finally moved toward the cemetery procession, I found myself walking slightly behind Michael and Laura, watching the way they spoke in low voices to each other, occasionally glancing back at me, as if checking whether I was still where I was supposed to be. Laura leaned closer to Michael and said something I couldn't hear, but I saw him nod once, quickly. That nod stayed with me longer than it should have. At the cemetery in Franklin, Tennessee, the sky was too bright for what we were doing. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying a sound that almost felt normal. Almost. As the coffin was lowered, I felt my phone vibrate again. Once. Twice. I froze. My hand slipped into my coat pocket, my fingers closing around the device before I even looked at it. Michael noticed. "Mom?" he said, turning slightly. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Slowly, I pulled the phone out. The screen lit up. One new message. No number, no name, just words that made everything around me feel suddenly too far away, too quiet, too staged. "They are not telling you the truth about how he died." And beneath it, one final line appeared before the screen went dark again. "Look at the coffin." The message on my screen did not fade from my mind as I stood there at the cemetery in Franklin, Tennessee, watching the coffin being lowered into the ground. "Look at the coffin." That was all it said, but it felt heavier than the soil being pushed over the wood. My hands were trembling now, not from grief, but from something colder, something closer to fear that I did not yet want to name. Michael stood beside me, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed forward, while Laura kept a steady hand on his arm as if she was anchoring him to the moment. "Mom," Michael said quietly without looking at me, "please, just stay with us. Do not wander off again." I did not respond. I could not stop staring at the burial site, because something about it no longer felt like an ending. It felt like a performance that I had been invited to but never fully explained. When the final prayers ended and people began to disperse, Laura leaned in toward me and said softly, "You look pale. Maybe you should sit in the car." Her voice was gentle, but there was something rehearsed in it, like she had practiced caring in front of others. I nodded slightly, not because I agreed, but because I needed space. As they walked ahead of me toward the parking area, I stayed behind, letting the crowd thin out, letting the noise fade. My phone remained quiet now, but I kept checking it anyway, like I was waiting for it to confess something. On the drive back to Nashville, I sat in the back seat of Michael's car. The silence between us was thick, broken only by the sound of tires on asphalt and the occasional turn signal clicking like a metronome, counting down something I could not see. Laura sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through messages, occasionally turning to say something softly to Michael that I could not hear. Every so often, she glanced back at me through the mirror, and I noticed it was not concern in her eyes. It was calculation. When we arrived home, the house felt different, even though nothing had changed physically. The same framed photos lined the hallway. The same scent of lavender cleaner lingered in the air, but everything felt staged, like someone had rearranged a life and forgotten to erase the feeling of intrusion. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steadier now, but my mind was not. I kept hearing the message again. "They are not telling you the truth about how he died." I turned slightly when I heard Michael behind me. "Mom," he said, "you have been quiet since the cemetery. What is going on?" I hesitated, then decided against telling him everything. Instead, I asked, "Why was the coffin sealed so quickly?" His expression changed just slightly, a flicker of discomfort he tried to hide. "That was the funeral home's recommendation," he said. "It was standard procedure." Laura entered the kitchen at that moment, setting her purse down carefully on the counter. "They explained everything," she added. "We did not want to delay things or make it harder for you." I looked at both of them. "Make it harder for me," I repeated slowly. "Or make it harder to question." The room went quiet in a way that felt too intentional. Michael ran a hand through his hair. "Mom, this is not helping," he said. "Dad is gone. We need to accept that. Gone." The word landed strangely now, like it did not belong to the same reality I was standing in. I nodded slowly, not because I accepted it, but because I needed to step back and think. Later that evening, I sat alone in the guest room they had prepared for me. The bed was neatly made, the curtains slightly open to let in the soft glow of streetlights from outside. I placed my phone on the nightstand and stared at it for a long time. I kept thinking about the coffin. I kept thinking about how no one wanted me to look too closely. Around 10 at night, I heard footsteps outside the room. A soft knock followed. "Mom," Michael said through the door. "Are you awake?" "Yes," I answered. The door opened slightly. He did not come in fully. "We are going to bed soon," he said. "Laura wanted me to check on you." I studied him in the dim light. He looked tired, but not in the way grief makes people tired. In the way secrecy does. Michael, I said quietly, did you see him? He frowned. Of course I saw him. At the hospital. After that, I said. He paused. That pause was long enough to answer everything he did not say. Mom, please, he finally said, lowering his voice. Do not do this. It will not bring him back. Then he stepped back and closed the door gently, but not before I noticed something in his hand. A folded paper. Not a hospital document. Not anything official. Just something he was not expecting me to see. After he left, I sat still for a long time. Then I stood up, walked quietly to the hallway, and saw the light under their bedroom doors still on. Their voices were low, almost whispers. I could not make out the words clearly, but I heard my name once, then silence. I took a step back, my heart steady but heavy, and that was when my phone lit up again in my hand without me touching it. One new message. If you want the truth, go back to the funeral home tomorrow morning. Ask for the sealed report, and below it, a final line appeared. Do not tell your son. The message arrived again just after sunrise, when the house in Nashville still felt like it was holding its breath from the night before. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I did not really taste, staring at the faint reflection of my own face in the dark window glass. Go back to the funeral home tomorrow morning. Ask for the sealed report. I read it 3 times, as if repetition might turn it into something less impossible. Around me, the house was awake but quiet. I could hear Michael moving somewhere upstairs, the slow rhythm of footsteps that tried very hard to sound normal. Laura was already in the kitchen by the time I stood up, dressed in a crisp blouse, her hair perfectly arranged as if nothing in our lives had shifted in the past 48 hours. Good morning, she said without looking up from her phone. Michael already left for the office. I nodded slightly. I need to go out today, I said. Her eyes lifted immediately, just for a second too long. Where? She asked. It was not curiosity, it was measurement. Downtown? I answered simply. She studied me like she was deciding whether that was acceptable. Then she smiled, small and controlled. Of course. Do you want me to arrange something for you? A driver? No, I said. I will manage. That was the first mistake I saw in her expression. Not anger, not surprise. Just a flicker of irritation that I was still making decisions without asking for permission. Michael came home briefly around noon, just long enough to drop off paperwork and avoid sitting down. I was standing in the hallway when he arrived. Mom, he said, loosening his tie. Laura said you were going out. Is everything okay? I looked at him for a moment. There was a time when that question would have sounded like care. Now it felt like supervision. I am fine, I replied. He hesitated. Do you need anything? No, I said again. He nodded, already halfway distracted by his phone, and disappeared into the office before I could say anything else. By the time I left the house, I had already decided I would not tell either of them where I was going. The funeral home in downtown Nashville looked the same as it had 2 days ago. Too quiet, too clean, too carefully maintained for a place that dealt in endings. The receptionist looked up as I entered. Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you? I swallowed once. I need access to my husband's full So-ed file. Her expression changed immediately. Not suspicion, but procedure. May I ask your relationship? I am his wife, I said. She nodded slowly and typed something into her computer. 1 moment, please. While she made the call, I stood there noticing everything I had ignored before. The way the chairs were arranged too symmetrically, the faint smell of disinfectant trying to erase something it could not fully reach. When she returned, she asked me to follow her into a small office. A man in a gray suit was already waiting there. Mrs. Carter, he said politely, this is not something we typically release without family authorization. I am his family, I said. My voice was calm, but it did not feel like mine anymore. He studied me for a moment, then slid a folder across the desk. There are some unusual instructions attached to this case, he said carefully. We were told not to disclose certain details unless specifically requested by the immediate spouse. My fingers tightened around the edge of the folder. Then I am requesting it. He nodded once. Understood. When I overwatch a watchane. What's wasing? When I opened it, I did not understand the first page. Then the second page made the first one worse. And by the third, I felt something inside me go still in a way I could not explain. The details were not what I had been told. Not even close. There were gaps. Missing confirmations. Notes about timing that did not align with what I had witnessed. This, I said slowly, is incomplete. The man shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, we followed the instructions provided by your son. My head lifted immediately. My son? He hesitated. Mr. Michael Carter handled most of the arrangements. The room seemed to narrow. That is not possible, I said quietly. But even as I said it, I remembered the way Michael had avoided my eyes at the cemetery. The way Laura had controlled every conversation. The way decisions had been made before I was even asked. I closed the folder slowly. I need a copy of everything, I said. All communications. The man looked uncertain. That will require authorization. Then get it, I replied. My voice did not rise, but something about it stopped him from arguing. As I left the building, the air outside felt too bright, too ordinary. My phone buzzed in my hand before I even reached my car. One new message. No number. Just text. You should not have asked for that file. I stood still on the sidewalk, people passing around me like I was invisible. Then another message appeared immediately after it. They are watching you now. And for the first time since this all began, I looked up at the street in front of me and realized I could not tell who was there by coincidence and who had already decided I should not make it back home. The message that warned me not to ask questions stayed with me longer than I expected, not because of its words, but because of the certainty behind it. They are watching you now. It was not phrased like fear. It was phrased like a fact already in motion. By the time I reached my car outside the funeral home in downtown Nashville, the air felt different, as if the city itself had become aware that I had looked too closely at something I was not supposed to see. I sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine for a moment, my hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. The folder was still beside me on the passenger seat, sealed open now, its contents no longer feeling like documents but like evidence I was not meant to understand. When I finally turned the key, my phone rang almost immediately. Michael's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. Mom. His voice came through quickly. Too quickly. Where are you right now? I looked at the road ahead. I just left downtown, I said calmly. A pause. Then his voice lowered slightly. Did you go there? I did not answer immediately. Yes, I said finally. Another pause. Heavier this time. You should have called me first, he said. It was not a request. It was correction. Why? I asked. He exhaled sharply. Because things are complicated right now. You are getting yourself involved in things you do not understand. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Then explain them to me. Silence. Not the kind that comes from grief, but the kind that comes from avoidance. Just come home, he said instead. We will talk when you are back. Then the line went dead. I sat there for a moment longer than I should have before pulling out of the parking lot. The drive back through Nashville felt longer than it had any right to be. Every intersection felt like it was asking me to choose between turning around or going deeper into something I could not undo. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street. I did not recognize it. I told myself that meant nothing, but I did not believe myself. Inside the house, the atmosphere was controlled in a way that immediately made my skin tighten. Laura was in the kitchen speaking softly into her phone, and when she saw me, she ended the call too quickly. You are back early, she said. It was not a question, it was observation. Michael came down the stairs a moment later, already changing his tone the moment he saw my face. Mom, he said, we need to talk. I set the folder on the kitchen table. So talk. Laura glanced at the folder immediately, her expression shifting just slightly. What is that? She asked. I looked at Michael instead. They told me you handled the funeral report, I said. His face tightened. That is not what I meant when I said that, he replied. Mom, I was trying to protect you. The word protect did not feel right in the room. It felt misplaced, like a label stuck on something that did not belong to it. Before I could respond, there was a knock at the front door. not soft, not casual, controlled. All three of us froze for a second before Michael moved toward it. When he opened the door, a man stood there in a dark suit, older, composed, carrying himself with the kind of quiet authority that did not need introduction. "Mrs. Carter," he said, looking past Michael directly at me. "I was not sure I would be invited inside, but I needed to see you personally." Something in his voice made me step forward. "Do I know you?" I asked. He nodded slightly. "You do, though it has been many years." Michael shifted beside the door. "Sir, this is a private residence." The man turned his gaze to Michael briefly. "Michael," he said, and my son went still in a way I had not seen before. "You look exactly like him." The room changed immediately. Laura straightened. "Excuse me?" she said sharply. The man did not look at her. He kept his eyes on me. "My name is Daniel Mercer," he said quietly. "I served with your husband." The silence that followed was different from all the others I had experienced since this began. This one had weight, history. "That is not possible," I said instinctively. "Richard left service long before I met him." Daniel nodded slowly. "That is what he told you," he replied. Michael's voice cut in quickly. "I think you should leave." But Daniel did not move. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small folded photograph, worn at the edges. He placed it on the table beside the sealed folder. "He did not die in the way you were told," he said calmly. Laura stepped forward. "We already went through all of this," she said. "The authorities confirmed everything." Daniel finally looked at her directly. "Which authorities?" he asked. The question landed harder than anything else in the room. Laura did not answer. I picked up the photograph. It showed Richard standing beside Daniel, younger, in military uniform I had never seen before. On the back, handwritten, were coordinates and a date from years ago, a date I did not recognize. "He asked me to deliver something to you," Daniel said. I looked up. "What kind of something?" He hesitated just slightly. "Proof," he said, "that what you buried was not the full truth." Michael's breathing changed behind me. I turned slowly toward him. "You knew him," I said. It was not a question anymore. Laura spoke first, too quickly. "This is ridiculous. We are done with conspiracy theories." But Daniel shook his head. "This is not theory," he said quietly. "This is containment." The word did not belong in our kitchen. It did not belong in any kitchen. My phone lit up again on the table before I could speak. One message. Unknown number. "He is closer than they told you." I looked up immediately, my eyes moving instinctively toward the hallway, toward the front door, toward the street beyond the windows, where the black sedan was still parked. And for the first time since the funeral, I realized the most dangerous part was not what I had been shown, but what had been standing outside my house the entire time without me noticing. The moment the word containment hung in the air, the entire room seemed to lose its temperature. I stood still, my fingers resting on the edge of the kitchen table, where the sealed folder and the photograph now sat side by side like two versions of a story that refused to agree with each other. Michael's face had gone pale in a way I had never seen before, not even at the cemetery. Laura was the first to break the silence, her voice sharp but carefully controlled. "This is absurd," she said, stepping slightly closer to Daniel Mercer. "You walk into our home and start speaking like this without any proof." Daniel did not react to her tone. He kept his attention on me, as if the rest of the room was noise he had already learned to ignore. "Mrs. Carter," he said quietly, "your husband did not simply pass away in a hospital bed. That is only what was recorded." I felt something tighten in my chest, not fear exactly, but the strain of holding too many contradictions at once. Michael finally spoke again, slower this time. "Sir, if you knew my father, then you also know he was sick. There were medical records." Daniel nodded once. "There were records," he agreed, "but not all of them were complete." He reached into his coat again and placed another item on the table, a small worn notebook, the edges softened by years of handling. I hesitated before touching it. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "From him," Daniel said simply. That answer did not make sense at first, until I opened it. The handwriting was familiar in a way that made my throat tighten before my mind caught up. Richard's handwriting. Not hospital forms. Not legal documents. Personnel notes. Dates. Short observations. References to meetings I had never been told about. Laura leaned over slightly, trying to see. "What is that supposed to be?" she asked. Daniel answered before I could. "Operational notes. He kept them during the last year of his service and after." Michael shook his head immediately. "My father worked in engineering. He was not military." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. "That is what he told you," he said again. The same sentence from earlier, but now it carried more weight. I turned another page. There were coordinates again, different locations this time, scattered across states I recognized only vaguely: Virginia, Illinois, Nevada, and then something else. A repeated phrase at the bottom of several pages. "If anything happens, do not trust the official explanation." My hand stopped moving. "He wrote this?" I asked quietly. Daniel nodded. "He knew there would be a report," he said. "He knew it would not reflect everything." Laura let out a short laugh, but it was thin, strained. "So what are you suggesting?" she said. "That someone staged his death?" Daniel finally looked at her directly. "I am suggesting," he said calmly, "that what you were given was a conclusion, not the full event." The room felt smaller with every sentence. Michael stepped forward, his voice lower now. "If you are saying my father is alive, that is impossible." Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me again. "I am saying," he said, "that he prepared for a version of this situation that you were never meant to question." I closed the notebook slowly. My mind kept trying to align grief with logic, memory with contradiction. The funeral, the sealed report, the messages. "I'm alive. Do not trust your children." I exhaled slowly. "Why would he say that?" I asked. Daniel's expression softened slightly, but only around the edges. "Because he knew who would be closest to the information after he was gone," he said. Laura's voice sharpened instantly. "Excuse me?" she said. "Are you accusing us of something?" Daniel did not respond to her. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small encrypted device. He placed it on the table next to the notebook. "This was left for you," he said, "if you chose to ask the right questions." I stared at it. "What is it?" I asked. "A recording," he said, "but it will only unlock under specific conditions." Michael looked at me now, his voice tighter. "Mom, you are not going to listen to this man, are you?" I turned to him slowly. "Then explain the notebook," I said. He hesitated again. That hesitation was becoming its own language. Before he could answer, Daniel spoke once more. "There is something else you should know," he said. "Your husband did not disappear from a vacuum. There are people who have been tracking his movement for years." Laura crossed her arms. "This is getting ridiculous." Daniel finally turned toward her fully. "Then you should have no problem letting Mrs. Carter hear what he recorded." He tapped the device. "Because it was meant for her, not for you." The silence that followed was different again. He placed the device in my hand. It felt heavier than it should have. "You will need to decide," he said quietly, "whether you want the version of truth that was prepared for you, or the one that was hidden from you." Michael stepped closer. "Mom, please," he said, his voice lower now, almost pleading. "Do not do this here." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time since the funeral, I noticed something I had missed before. Not anger, not guilt, something closer to fear. Not of me, of what I might learn. I held the device between my fingers. The room was completely still now, every breath suspended around a single decision I had not yet made. Then, just as I was about to press the activation button, my phone lit up again on the table. One message: unknown number. "If you play that recording, you will not be able to go back." And beneath it, a second line appeared immediately after. "Look behind you." The words on the screen did not feel like a warning anymore. They felt like a boundary being drawn around me, tightening with every second I stayed still. "If you play that recording, you will not be able to go back." I held the small device in my hand, feeling its weight in a way that made no logical sense. Then the second line appeared beneath it. "Look behind you." I did not move immediately. Not because I was calm, but because every instinct I had was suddenly working in parallel, pulling me in opposite directions. The room behind me was silent. Too silent. Michael was no longer speaking. Laura was no longer breathing loudly enough to notice. Daniel was still standing near the table, watching me without urgency, as if he already knew what I would choose. Slowly, I turned. The living room behind me looked exactly as it had moments before, yet something in it felt repositioned, like a photograph slightly rotated off its axis. Michael stood near the hallway entrance, his shoulders rigid, his eyes fixed on me in a way I could not read. Laura was closer to the kitchen now, her arms crossed tightly, her face no longer composed. It was controlled, but only barely. "Mom," Michael said carefully, "do not listen to that device right now." His voice was quieter than before, but heavier. I looked at him. "Why?" I asked. Laura stepped forward immediately. "Because this is manipulation," she said. "You are being fed fragments to create panic." Daniel did not move. "Fragments do not exist without a source," he said calmly. Laura turned on him sharply. "You are not part of this family," she said. "You have no right to come into our home and destabilize her like this." Daniel finally shifted his attention to her. "I was part of your husband's life long before I knew any of you existed," he replied. That sentence changed the air again. Michael exhaled sharply. "This is insane," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Dad is gone. We buried him. We saw it." I watched him closely. "You saw what was presented," I said quietly. The room went still again. Not from interruption, but from recognition. Laura's voice sharpened. "Evelyn, stop," she said. "You are letting this man rewrite your memory of what happened." I looked at her. "Then explain the notebook," I said. Her jaw tightened. She did not answer. That silence mattered more than words. I turned back to Daniel. "Play it," I said. Michael stepped forward quickly. "Mom, please," he said again, more urgently now. "You do not understand what you are doing." I held his gaze. "Then help me understand," I said. For a moment, he did not respond, not because he had nothing to say, but because everything he could say would lead somewhere he did not want to go. Laura suddenly moved toward me. "Evelyn, you are grieving," she said more softly now, shifting strategy. "This is normal. People see patterns when they are in shock." I did not look away from her. "I have not been in shock for 3 days," I said. "I have been observing." That sentence made her pause. Daniel stepped forward slightly. "The recording will not answer everything," he said, "but it will confirm whether you are dealing with misunderstanding or deliberate concealment." I pressed the activation button. The device lit up immediately. A soft sound filled the room. Not a voice yet, but static, followed by a pause that felt longer than it should have. Michael closed his eyes briefly. Laura turned away. Then a voice came through. Not loud, not dramatic. Controlled, familiar. My breath stopped before my mind caught up. It was Richard. "If you are hearing this," the voice said, "then I did not make it back the way I intended." The room changed instantly. Michael stepped back. Laura's face tightened, all her earlier confidence collapsing into something less stable. I stood completely still. The voice continued. "There are things I never told you, Evelyn, because I believed I still had time to correct them myself." A pause. But time ran out sooner than expected. I heard myself whisper, "Richard." The recording did not respond. It simply continued. "If Michael is present when you hear this," the voice added, "then he already knows more than he is admitting." Michael's head snapped up immediately. "That is not true," he said sharply. "That is not true." Laura turned to him instantly. "You told him?" she asked. "No," Michael said quickly. "I did not." But his voice was already too defensive, too fast. Daniel watched both of them without expression. The recording continued. "Do not allow this to be simplified," Richard's voice said. "What is happening did not begin with my death, and it will not end with my absence." The static increased slightly, then cleared again. "Evelyn, there is a file you were never meant to request," the voice said. My hand tightened around the device. "It is not in the funeral records," it continued. "It is stored separately. Michael has access to it." Michael's face went pale instantly. "Stop!" he said out loud, even though the recording could not hear him. Laura stepped back slightly, as if the room itself had become unstable. Daniel spoke quietly. "This is what I was referring to," he said. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes on Michael. "What file?" I asked. Michael shook his head quickly. Mom? I do not know what that is, he said. But his eyes did not match his words. The recording ended abruptly. Silence returned, but it was no longer the same silence as before. This one was shaped, defined, heavy with implication. I lowered the device slowly. You said I should not trust my children, I said, looking at Daniel. He nodded once. And now you have something more than words to consider, he replied. Laura suddenly stepped forward again, her composure breaking slightly. This is dangerous, she said. Whoever is feeding you this information is isolating you from your own family. I looked at her, or revealing why I needed to be isolated, I said. Michael's voice rose slightly. Mom, you are choosing to believe a recording over your own son, he said. I turned to him fully. I am choosing to believe what aligns with what I can no longer ignore, I said quietly. That was the moment he stopped arguing, not because he agreed, because something in him realized I was no longer asking for permission to understand. Daniel reached into his coat one more time. This time, he did not take out another object. He took out a photograph and placed it on the table without speaking. I looked down at it. My breath caught immediately. It was not Richard this time. It was Michael, standing beside someone I did not recognize, wearing something I had never seen him wear. And written beneath the image, in handwriting I now recognized too well, were coordinates I had seen before. But this time, they were marked with a date that had not yet happened. The photograph did not leave my sight. Even after Daniel had stepped back into silence, and Michael had reached for it too quickly, as if trying to erase its existence before it settled into meaning, I watched his fingers hover just above it, then stop. That hesitation again. It was becoming the only thing in this house that felt honest. Laura was the first to break the stillness. This is enough, she said sharply, but her voice carried something uneven beneath it now, like it was losing control of its own edges. This man walks in here with pictures, recordings, claims about timelines that make no sense. And we are supposed to, what, accept it? She turned toward me as if trying to pull me back into a shared reality. Evelyn, this is not truth. This is disruption. I did not answer immediately. I was still looking at Michael. Not the photograph. Not Daniel. Only my son. Where were you on that date? I asked quietly. The question did not land like an accusation. It landed like a door closing slowly. Michael's eyes flickered. I do not even know what date you are talking about, he said. But his voice was too careful now. Too controlled. Laura stepped in immediately. He was with me, she said quickly. We were out of town. I remember it clearly. Daniel let out a quiet breath, almost like he had expected that answer. Interesting, he said softly. Laura turned on him. What is that supposed to mean? Daniel did not raise his voice. He did not need to. It means, he said, that travel records do not always match memory when memory is curated. Michael's jaw tightened. You are accusing us of fabricating where we were? He asked. Daniel shook his head once. I am saying the documentation exists independently of belief. I felt the room shift again, not because of what was said, but because of what was no longer stable. Laura reached for the photograph on the table, flipping it over. This proves nothing, she said, but her hand was not steady anymore. This could be from any assignment, any contact, any misunderstanding. It is not a misunderstanding, Daniel replied quietly. It is a pattern. I finally spoke again. What pattern? My voice was calm, but I felt something inside me aligning, pieces that had not belonged together before, now forcing themselves into place. Daniel looked at me directly. Your husband was involved in a long-term protective operation, he said. Not one he fully controlled at the end. Michael reacted immediately. That is not possible, he said. My father was an engineer. He worked private contracts. Daniel nodded slightly. That is what he was allowed to say. The silence that followed was heavier than before, not because of confusion, but because of resistance breaking in small places. Laura suddenly stepped away from the table. I am not listening to this anymore, she said, grabbing her phone. We are calling someone, a lawyer, someone who can stop this before it goes further. Michael did not stop her. That was the first thing I noticed. He did not stop her. Instead, he was still staring at the photograph, as if trying to locate a version of his father that still fit inside the life he believed he had lived. I turned slightly toward Daniel. "If what you are saying is true," I said, "then why now?" Daniel paused. That was the first time he looked uncertain. "Because something changed," he said. The protection structure around him collapsed when the official report was filed. I felt a chill settle in my chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with realization. Laura came back into the room, her voice sharper now. "This is insane," she said. "We are being dragged into something criminal without any verification." She turned to Michael. "You are not seriously considering this, are you?" Michael finally looked up at her. And for the first time, I saw something different in his expression. Not agreement, not denial, division. "I do not know what to think anymore," he admitted quietly. That sentence changed the room more than anything else. Laura's composure cracked slightly. "Michael," she said, her tone tightening, "you are letting a stranger rewrite your understanding of your own family." Daniel stepped forward slightly. "No," he said. "She is doing that herself." Laura turned toward him sharply. But before she could respond, Michael spoke again. "If there is a file," he said, his voice lower now, "then I need to see it." I studied him carefully. "You said you did not know about it," I said. He hesitated. That hesitation was no longer subtle. It was structural. "I know enough," he admitted. Laura turned toward him immediately. "What does that mean?" she asked. But Michael did not answer her. He was looking at me now. "Mom," he said slowly, "there are things you were not meant to see. Not because they are false, because they are not complete." Daniel nodded once, as if that was the closest anyone had come to clarity all evening. "Incomplete is another word for controlled access," he said. I felt my hands tighten slightly at my sides. "Controlled by who?" I asked. No one answered immediately. Then Michael spoke again, quieter this time, "By people who believed it was safer that way." Laura shook her head sharply. "This is exactly what I am talking about," she said. "Vague authority, hidden groups. You are being manipulated into seeing threats everywhere." Daniel turned toward her. "No," he said calmly. "I'm showing her where the gaps are." Laura opened her mouth to respond, but stopped when Michael raised his hand slightly. Not forcefully, just enough to pause her. That small gesture changed everything again. He turned back to me. "Mom," he said, "if I show you something, you cannot react immediately. You have to understand that." I looked at him for a long moment. "You already brought me into this," I said. "There is no going back to before." He exhaled slowly, then reached into his jacket. Laura's voice sharpened instantly. "Michael, do not." But he did not stop. He placed a second photograph on the table. This one was older, faded at the edges, and in it, I saw Richard again. But not alone. Standing beside him was Daniel, and behind them, partially obscured, was a structure I had never seen before, marked with a symbol I did not recognize but somehow felt familiar to my body before my mind understood it. The moment I saw it, Daniel spoke quietly. "That location," he said, "is still active." And before anyone could respond, Michael's phone rang once from the table, lighting up with a message preview that made the entire room go still. If she sees the second sight, the transition begins immediately. The moment the phone went silent after the message about the transition, something in the room changed in a way I could not explain. It was not louder. It was not darker. It was simply no longer pretending to be ordinary. Michael stood frozen, his hand still hovering over the table where the phone had just lit up. Laura's face had tightened into something sharper than fear, more like frustration trying to hold itself together. Daniel, however, did not move at all. He looked at the message as if it confirmed something he had already accepted long before I ever entered this conversation. I slowly lowered myself into the chair, not because I was weak, but because I was no longer interested in reacting the way they expected me to react. "What does that mean?" Laura said finally, her voice lower now, controlled but strained. "Transition begins immediately." No one answered her right away. Michael exhaled slowly and ran a hand across his face. "I do not know," he said, but even as he said it, he did not sound convinced by his own words anymore. I looked at him, not as a son trying to protect a version of reality, but as someone standing at the edge of admitting he had already stepped outside of it. "Then tell me what you do know," I said quietly. The room held still for a moment before Michael finally sat down across from me. For the first time since this began, he did not look like he was managing a situation. He looked like someone trying to decide whether honesty was still safe. There were things Dad was involved in, he said slowly. Things he could not bring home. Things he was not supposed to explain in full, even to us. Laura immediately shook her head. That is not what you said before, she snapped. Michael did not look at her. That silence between them said more than any argument could. Daniel finally spoke, his voice steady. He is choosing how much truth he can carry right now, he said. Laura turned toward him sharply. And you are encouraging this? She asked. Daniel's expression did not change. I am not encouraging anything, he said. I am just explaining what already exists. I listened to all of them, but my focus was no longer on proving anything. Something inside me had shifted in the past hours, not into confusion, but into clarity about something different entirely. I was no longer trying to reconstruct the past. I was trying to understand what kind of future I was still standing in. I placed my hands flat on the table. Enough, I said softly. The word was not loud, but it cut through everything. They all turned to me. I looked at Michael first. I am not going to chase pieces of truth that are only given when it becomes convenient, I said. Then I looked at Laura. And I am not going to participate in fear just because it keeps everyone in control. Laura opened her mouth, but I raised my hand slightly. Not aggressively, just enough to stop the direction she was about to take. Then I looked at Daniel. If you came here to pull me into something, I said, then you need to be clear about what that something is. Daniel nodded once. That is fair, he said. For the first time, his tone softened slightly. But what I came here for is not to pull you in, he added. It is to make sure you are not left out of it. That sentence settled differently in the room, not as threat, not as reassurance, as responsibility. Michael looked down at the table. I never wanted this, he said quietly. I believed him. That was the strange part. Even now, even with everything fractured, I did not see malice in him. I saw avoidance, a lifetime of choosing the easier silence over the harder truth. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Then stop trying to manage it alone, I said. Laura turned toward me immediately. So what do you suggest? She asked. I looked at her for a moment. There was something in her voice now that was no longer purely defensive. It was tired. I suggest we stop assuming we already understand what this is, I said. Daniel nodded slightly, almost approvingly. That is the first correct step, he said. Michael let out a slow breath. There is a place, he said finally, connected to what Dad left behind. A physical site. Not here. Laura immediately responded. Absolutely not, she said. You are not dragging us into some hidden facility based on vague messages and old photographs. Michael looked at her. Then what do you suggest we do? He asked quietly. That question did not have an answer she liked. The silence that followed was not dramatic. It was simply empty of certainty. I stood up slowly. All eyes shifted to me again. I am going, I said. Michael frowned. Mom, no, he said immediately. You should not go anywhere alone right now. I looked at him. I have not been alone since this started, I said. That is exactly the problem. He did not respond. Not because he disagreed, but because he could not argue with something that precise. Laura stepped forward. If you go, we go together, she said quickly. I studied her for a moment. No, I said calmly. Not because I do not want you there, but because I need to understand what is real without everyone trying to shape it for me at the same time. That was the first time she did not immediately counter me. Daniel reached into his coat again, but this time he did not take out a photograph or a device. He placed a single set of coordinates on a small card and slid it toward me. If you are going, he said, this is where you start. I took it without hesitation. Michael stood up as well. I will drive, he said. It was not a question. It was a decision he had finally stopped postponing. Laura did not stop him this time. She simply watched, her arms folded, her expression caught between disbelief and something closer to resignation. As we moved toward the door, I felt something I had not felt since the funeral. Not fear, not confusion, but motion. A direction that no longer depended on permission. Outside, The air felt different again, as if the world had shifted slightly while we were not looking. Michael unlocked the car without speaking. I paused for a moment before getting in, my hand resting on the door. For a second, I looked back at the house. At Laura standing in the doorway. At Daniel behind her, still watching. Then I got into the car. Michael started the engine. And as we pulled away from the house, my phone lit up one final time on the seat beside me. One message. No number, just words. You are not going to find what you think you are looking for. And beneath it, one final line appeared as the car merged onto the road. You are going to find what was already waiting for you. The car moved through the Tennessee highway in a silence that no longer felt empty, but suspended, like the world itself was holding its breath to see what I would choose to believe next. Michael kept both hands on the wheel, his eyes fixed ahead, but I could see it in the tightness of his jaw that he was not really driving. He was thinking, replaying, calculating. The coordinates on the small card sat between us on the center console like something alive, something that kept changing meaning depending on how long we looked at it. I rested my hands in my lap, no longer searching my phone, no longer reacting to every vibration or silence. There was a point where fear becomes repetitive, and after that, it stops guiding you. It just follows you. We are getting close, Michael said finally, his voice low. I nodded once. Outside, the landscape had shifted from suburban edges into quieter stretches of road, where trees gathered closer together and the sky felt heavier. Did you ever come here before? I asked him. He hesitated before answering. Once, he said, with Dad. That was all he gave me. No details, no explanation. Just a fragment that felt intentionally incomplete. I did not press him. Somewhere behind us, that version of conversation had already stopped working. We turned off the main road onto a narrower path that cut through dense woodland. The tires crunched against gravel, the sound sharp in the quiet. Eventually, the road ended at a gate. Not official, not marked, just metal, weathered, partially hidden by overgrown brush. Michael slowed the car to a stop. This is it, he said. I stepped out first. The air here was different, cooler. Still, it did not feel abandoned, which was the first thing I noticed. It felt maintained without wanting to be seen. Michael came around the car, standing beside me without speaking. We both looked at the gate. After a moment, I reached forward and pushed it. It opened without resistance. That is not locked, Michael said quietly. No, I replied. It is allowed. We walked in. The path beyond the gate was narrow but clear, as if people had walked it recently enough for nature not to reclaim it fully. Trees lined both sides, and the deeper we went, the less I felt like we were entering something hidden, and more like we were returning to something that had been paused. After several minutes, the trees opened into a clearing. There was a structure ahead. Not large, not dramatic, but precise in a way that made it feel less like a building and more like a decision. Michael stopped walking. I kept going. Mom, he said behind me, but his voice was uncertain now. I did not turn back. The door of the structure was already open. Inside, the air was cooler, controlled. There were no signs of chaos, no signs of urgency, only order. On a table near the center of the room sat a sealed envelope. My name was written on it, not printed, written. I approached slowly and picked it up. Michael stepped inside behind me now, his breathing slightly uneven. Do not open that, he said. But there was no authority in it anymore. Only hesitation. I opened it. Inside was a letter. Not long. Not emotional in the way people expect final messages to be. It was structured. Intentional. The handwriting was unmistakable. Richards. I read silently at first, my eyes moving across lines that did not ask for forgiveness or understanding, but for recognition. He had written about choices I had never been included in, about risks I had never been told were connected to our lives, about the difference between absence and disappearance. Michael stood still behind me. I could feel him reading over my shoulder without needing to look. When I reached the final paragraph, I stopped. I read it again. And then, a third time, slower. Michael finally spoke. What does it say? I lowered the letter slightly. My voice came out quieter than I expected. It says he never left because he wanted to, I said. It says he left because staying would have made us part of something we were never meant to inherit. Silence filled the room. Not confusion this time. Understanding, arriving too late to change anything. Michael sat down slowly in the chair nearest to him, as if his body had decided before his mind did. So, he is alive? He asked. But the question no longer sounded like hope. It sounded like exhaustion. I looked at the letter again. I do not think that is the question anymore, I said. From somewhere deeper in the structure, a small light flickered on, as if responding to our presence rather than activating for it. A second envelope slid into view beneath the table, previously hidden. I did not move immediately. Michael noticed it first. "Mom," he said quietly. "Do not open that one." I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was too late for warnings now. I reached down and took it. Before I opened it, I looked at him. "Whatever is inside," I said. "You already brought me here to face it." He did not answer. I opened the second envelope. Inside was a single photograph, but this one was different. It was not history. It was current. And in it, I saw myself standing in this very place, though I had not been here before today. The image was recent enough that I could still see the details of what I was wearing now. My breath stopped. Michael leaned closer. "That is not possible," he whispered. I turned the photo over. There were no words this time, only coordinates again, and a time written beneath them. Tomorrow. Before I could process what that meant, the light in the room shifted again, and somewhere behind us, the door we had entered through closed on its own. Not slammed, not locked, just closed, as if the building had decided the conversation was no longer optional. And in that quiet, I realized something I had not been willing to accept until this moment. Whatever truth I had come here to find, had already decided I would not be leaving it behind.